Good morning, everyone. We might just give people just a moment to settle, and then we will start for this morning for day two. Yep, that's the one. Awesome. Welcome everybody to day two of the Open Education Global 2024 conference. For those of you who came along last night, it's very good to see that you are shaping up already, and good to see so many of you here so early in the morning. I also am very glad to hear that most of you managed to make it home last night without being drenched. We had a couple of exceptions, some people sending me photos and the like of where they got stranded, but luckily everyone managed to get home. But as we said last night, this is what Brisbane is like in summer, and there may be every opportunity that there will be a repeat tonight and tomorrow night. So just keep that in mind if you are travelling about the city. So as we begin this morning, I want to make sure that I follow from yesterday and make sure that we acknowledge the country upon which we stand today. Yesterday we had a magnificent welcome to country, and we had a lot of people who were then talking to me afterwards to say that they had read up on this, that they had explored further, and I'm really glad to see that, especially for our international visitors, that they were able to take something out of that as well. And so in that spirit, in a spirit of reconciliation, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the lands of Mianjin, that we are on the lands of the Turrbal and Jagera peoples, and I would like to show my respect for First Nations peoples, both those of you who may be in the audience today and also those who play an important part in Australian society. In particular, those peoples who help to inform higher education and help to inform the way that we move forward in order to make a more just and tolerant society. I think it's very important to do this because as open educators, one of the things that we do by default that is baked into Creative Commons is attribution. When you build upon something, when you take an idea, when you do anything, you attribute, you say where it originally came from. And so to me, we are here building upon a tradition that goes back forever, that is one of learning, of openly sharing, and also of coming together. And so we're building upon that. So think of it also as a type of attribution that fits very well with our values as open practitioners. Now, we do have a few housekeeping things just to remind, because we do have a large number of people who, for today, it is your first day. So if today is your first day at the conference, welcome. And if you're joining us online as well, welcome as well. So you'll notice that we have volunteers in the red shirts outside. They're here to help. So if you need any assistance, please talk to them. Session chairs will be supporting each one of the presentation sessions. And if you have any questions as a session chair, please do come and see me. And we also have the wonderful technical staff from the Convention Centre who are located outside each one of the rooms. If we move on to housekeeping for places, most of the conference takes place on this level. We have quite a nice small footprint. And there is additional workshop space down on the yellow floor on the next level down. So if you have anything that is scheduled for M2, that will be downstairs. We have a room, M1, which is directly downstairs. It's at the far end, which we're using as a low sensory space. So if you need just a bit of time out, you need a bit of peace and quiet, please go down there and make use of that space. And also outside the conference, you may have heard last night about the fantastic State Library Queensland bookshop, which Igor describes as a very dangerous place, especially if you have limits about your carry-on luggage. But during the conference, if you take your lanyard with your name badge in, they will give you a 10% discount off-site. So please do visit State Library, take a look at their excellent bookshop, and I am not responsible for excess luggage fees. Okay, so moving on, we also have internet, and if you are not connected to the internet yet, we have the details which will come up on the screen now. Hopefully. There we go. Marvellous. So please do log on. If you have any details, we have the convention staff who will be able to help you out. Now, before I go to my reflections for the day, we do have some social interactions as well. So if you are on X, on Instagram, on Mastodon, anywhere else, LinkedIn, please take a photo, tag the conference, make a comment. And you will be able to help those who are unable to be here to also get a sense and a feel for the conference. So that brings me then to some reflections from yesterday. I want to first of all thank everybody because the day one, there's always a couple of things that need to be ironed out, and everyone was marvellous yesterday, very understanding. We had a couple of technical hiccups, but we managed to fix those. I want to especially thank, where are you, Jan? Right there, Jan, who was magnificent in being able to fix almost everything with Shed and for our presenters and the like. And if you do experience anything today, we'll make sure that we get that sorted as quickly as possible. But the main thing that came through yesterday, so I've got a couple of points here that I noticed. The first one is about community. Now, the best thing that you can possibly hear is new people to the community or those who are adjacent or outside the community making observations. And I have heard this repeatedly yesterday where people were saying to me, this is my first open conference, or even from our sponsors, this is our first open conference. And they all commented on how warm, friendly, inviting, accepting, how generous all of us are. They said this is probably one of the best communities, if not the best, that they have had the joy of being a part of. And so that's something that all of you own. So being open practitioners, these are some of the values that we hold dear. And also values came through in a number of the presentations yesterday when people were talking about how they are personally and individually motivated to be in this space. It was wonderful to hear that people were very focused on what is best for my students, what is best for my colleagues, how do I support? It was very much an outward-looking focus. And I think that one of the, it's very telling that one of the areas of openness that I see coming in across the entire community now is a lot of discussion around self-care. Because as open practitioners, I think that we're remarkably good at supporting everybody else except for ourselves. And that we need to recognise that, and this came through as well, that time and resources are finite. And so as a result, we try to do the best that we possibly can with what we've got. Also, I heard repeatedly through yesterday that people said to me, this is the first or one of the first times that I've ever been able to really take a deep breath, take a bit of time for myself, and ponder the big questions. Why am I involved in education? What am I actually doing? What's education for? And I'm really, really happy to hear that, because we get involved in the grind, the day-to-day of doing things. We have deadlines, we have emails, we have meetings, we have all of these sorts of mechanistic things within the university that take away from our time to actually think about why did we do this in the first place. And so these conferences are very important from that perspective. I did mention the personal experiences, and that came through with a few of the workshops and the sessions yesterday where people started charting their own journey and also considering where that journey is leading them and what they need and what they are interested in. And I had a lot of good feedback from those sessions. So people are now really thinking about, what do I need as an individual and how might I take my own practice forward? And this is an excellent opportunity for you maybe to compare notes with other people whilst you're here at the conference. The last one that I noticed was a lot of talk about impact. So essentially we're doing a lot of good work, but the problem is we can't present that as self-evident good. What we need to know is that we need to know, is what we are doing worth doing? And if so, how do we actually show evidence of that? And so I'm very, very pleased to see the maturation of the discussion. Whilst we still collect things like student savings data, textbook savings and the like, there are people who are looking beyond those and looking at other metrics which are far harder to not only gather but also to communicate succinctly. Most of us, when we look at things like textbook savings, number of students, number of courses, these are easier to calculate. They also form very critical and concise talking points with senior management. When we start to look at a more qualitative approach and we start to look at what narratives exist here, that's harder to craft. And I'm really pleased to see that some of you are tackling that, not only tackling it, but sharing it with everybody else. Because we're all in this position where we all need to show that kind of impact and evidence, and I think the best way to do that is as a community. So I'm going to leave you with one last thought before I hand over to Sarah to introduce our keynote for day 2, and that is that I'm reading a book by Murray Bookchin at the moment. Murray Bookchin is was an ecological activist, but also very well known for his anarchist writings as well. And one point that really resonated with me was that he was talking about the crisis of climate. And he said, if we are to accept that the current situation on Earth is a direct result of our actions, because we are the only species capable of coming up with the tools and the environment to create what we currently have, we likewise have to believe that we are the only species on Earth with the tools and power to make it right. And I think that education is very much the same way. We all look at the mechanisms of higher education in particular. We look at the inequalities. We look at some of the assumptions and we question those, and we say, how did it come to this? But at the same time, it is a system that was created by human beings, and human beings like yourselves as a community have the tools to make that change. So with that, I'm going to pass over to Sarah, and then we will hear from our keynote for this morning. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I'd like to acknowledge the Turrbal and Yagara First Nations owners of these unceded but beautiful lands that we are gathered here today, and pay my respects to their elders, laws, customs and creation spirits. Hello everyone, my name is Sarah Howard. I am very lucky to be one of the co-chairs of the conference, and I'm from QUT. Thank you so much to everyone that could venture over the river and join us on our beautiful campus at Gardens Point at QUT. Unfortunately, it's a storm. You probably didn't get a chance to come into the library that we look after, but also our beautiful campus. But if you can, do venture back across. We've got a beautiful space over there. It was with such great pleasure this morning that I am going to introduce our keynote speaker today. A few years ago, back in 2019, my co-chairs and I, Carmel, Anna and I, were fortunate enough to go to another conference in Melbourne, Australia, and we saw this person, and she just wowed us, and we have not stopped thinking about her. So when we had the opportunity, we knew who to invite to Australia as our keynote for OEGlobal Conference 2024. Coming all the way from Aotearoa, New Zealand, Siobhan Leachman is an open knowledge advocate and a Wikimedian focused on natural history. Siobhan is a prolific editor of Wikimedia and volunteers for galleries, libraries, archives, museums, the GLAM sector, as a citizen scientist and digital humanities projects. Her mission in life is to connect to everything. She advocates for open access and open Creative Commons copyright licenses and defends the public domain. Her work includes citizen science, crowdsourcing, Wikimedia species articles, and so much more. In 2018, Siobhan was awarded the Auckland War Memorial Museum Medal and is a companion of the Auckland War Memorial Museum. In 2023, she was awarded the Wikimedia Laureate Award. Please join me in welcoming Siobhan today as she presents From Passive Absorption to Empowered Co-Creation, a journey into the world of open knowledge. Thank you, Siobhan.
Kia ora koutou katoa. That's a greeting in Māori, the Indigenous people of New Zealand. It is a great privilege for me to be here today. I respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. I extend that respect to other First Australians present here today and also online. And I want to thank the Open Education Global Organising Committee for inviting me to speak, and also the open education community here today for making me feel so very welcome at this fabulous conference. So who am I? Well, I feel really lucky to be here today because I am not an education professional. What I am is a middle-aged Pākehā or white woman who is a lifelong learner, a citizen or community scientist, a Wikipedian, and an avid consumer and reuser of knowledge. Knowledge that many of you spend your professional lives helping to share and to teach. And today, I'm wanting to explore openness through the lens of my own personal journey, because I feel I've travelled from being a passive absorber of education to what I now regard myself as being an empowered co-creator of knowledge. And I've made this journey as a result of the support and inclusiveness of multiple individuals and communities. And by telling you my story, I'm aiming to inspire you to basically think more broadly about the impact of openness. By looking at my journey through the lens of openness of content, openness of community, and openness of personal and professional practice, I'm aiming to convince you that open really is everyone's business. Now, like most folk, I started life as a passive absorber of knowledge. I went to primary and secondary school, and then I was lucky enough to go to university. And although the open knowledge movement likely impacted my learning, I certainly wasn't conscious of it. In fact, I was well into my adult years before I was first exposed to the concept of open access to knowledge. And when I talk about open access, I don't just mean the ability to access information. I will always mean the ability to reuse it if appropriate. So my first step on my journey into openness was when I first started transcribing with the Smithsonian Transcription Centre. I was in the privileged position of being a stay-at-home mum looking after my kids full-time, but I was looking for a mentally stimulating hobby. The Smithsonian Institution had recently set up this website that allowed volunteers to transcribe scanned, handwritten texts into a machine-readable form. And the Smithsonian wanted to make the knowledge contained in those handwritten texts more findable and more reusable to everyone, including scientists. Now, when I first started, I was a typical first-time contributor to a crowdsourcing project. I went to the site, I didn't bother creating an account, I certainly didn't read the instructions, and I just did a little bit anonymously. I had a lot to learn. I'd never done this type of volunteering before. I didn't know anything about digitisation, transcription, crowdsourcing, community science, or anything about online contributions. I didn't know about copyright, about open licensing, nor much about the potential for reuse. I went there because I was looking for a fun activity, and after a few false starts, I got lucky. I found a project in the Transcription Centre that was just a match made in heaven for me. I met the long dead, but in my eyes, he's fabulously wonderful. He's a natural history professional, and his name's Vernon Orlando Bailey. And in the space of a rainy long weekend, I sat down and helped fully transcribe one of his field journals from 1906. Now, this opening up of the Smithsonian archives unfurled this whole new world for me. Vernon was travelling in the Midwest of America to study wolves in the early 1900s. And he didn't know it at the time, but this is when wolves were being hunted and basically wiped out. They were being hunted to the point of local extinction in most of the places he was visiting. And I was immediately sucked in by his spare writing, his pen sketches, the surprise of an occasional photograph or lyrical prose description of his surroundings. I kept transcribing because I desperately wanted to know what happened next. So much so, I was actually prepared to read the instructions for the project in order to double-check what I was doing was correct. Now, this long-dead man with horrendous handwriting became real to me, almost like a friend. Even now, when I think of him, I get this wave of affection. By transcribing his journals, he taught me so much. It turns out you do not even have to be alive to be a great educator. So he taught me the importance of field journals and how important they are to natural history. His was so packed with information on the state of biodiversity in the Midwest of America in the early 1900s. In another journal of his, he mentions observing the passenger pigeon, for example. Now, this is a bird that used to be so numerous it darkened the skies for days during its migration. A bird that went extinct due to hunting and deforestation. Vernon also gave me a crash course in biology. He taught me the importance of binomials, the scientific names of species. Last time I'd learned about them was in high school, and at the time I was not paying attention. I just wanted to get through that portion of the class so I could move on to my loves of physics and chemistry. Vernon also taught me about species synonyms, that how species names change over time. And he taught me my brain was designed for and adored pattern recognition. His writing really is that horrendous. But if I wanted to know what happened next, I had to decipher it. I had to be patient. And after a while, I'd get my eye in, and what used to be illegible became much more easily readable. Now, after Vernon's journal, I was hooked. I started looking for other projects in the Transcription Centre, and I transcribed digital humanities content, diaries and letters of artists, astronomy logbooks, photo albums, diaries of the inventor of Bakelite, logbooks of clock manufacturers, botany specimen sheets, bumblebee entomology labels, and of course, more field journals of scientists. The breadth of projects was fabulous, but I definitely gravitated towards natural history content. And the Smithsonian, by opening up their access to their archives via the Transcription Centre, is what I regard to be a fabulous example of openness of content and how this can actually impact the lives of volunteers like me. Because by now it wasn't just wanting to keep myself entertained. There was also a love of learning new things, so many new things, content that I didn't even realise existed, and it was starting to dawn on me at this stage how varied and important the contents of cultural heritage organisations are. I had absolutely no idea about the amount of handwritten documents held by museums, archives, libraries. And once I started to get an appreciation of the scope and also the potential of reuse, I was motivated by a desire to help so that everyone had access to these resources. I also began to learn about the potential for progress when that information was unlocked. As rewards for the work we were doing, the Transcription Centre would share presentations by scientists, librarians, historians, telling us volunteers what they could or would do with the information we were transcribing, the research we were actually helping with. And these presentations emphasised how impactful the openness of this content was and how useful the reuse of our transcriptions were. And I remember a particular presentation by a botanist explaining the science that could be done when the transcribed data on handwritten specimen labels was used. They used the species names, the dates, and also the location data to show the spread of invasive species, and also perhaps the impacting decrease in the range of endemic species. And once I worked out how important the data was and how impactful its reuse is, I was even more motivated to help. I mean, I could do my small part in assisting the preservation of species. Participating in the Transcription Centre also encouraged me to think about crowdsourcing as a discipline, to learn more about crowdsourcing and citizen or community science, to read blogs, academic papers, to watch presentations, and I started considering why I was participating, what actually was motivating me, to consider what worked for me for the Transcription Centre in comparison to other crowdsourcing or citizen science projects I'd tried but didn't end up as richly engaged with. I also quickly realised that if I was spending my precious time transcribing, I wanted the widest audience for it, with the largest ability to reuse it. I wasn't spending all my time doing this work only for it to be used by certain researchers or certain scientists. And this is where I first started actively thinking about reuse restrictions, as well as copyright, and the impact they may very well have on the dissemination of knowledge. Now, at this point, I was loving transcription work so much, I'd rather transcribe than watch TV or read novels. My favourite part was the serendipitous research rabbit holes that I'd fall down. I'd make discoveries that I'd share with other volunteers and the project manager on social media or via email. And because I had learned about the impact of the reuse of that information, I started to realise I could share some of the results of these research rabbit holes with other institutions. And I hope by doing so that the discovered data would make its way into their databases or their collections. And this in turn would make it easier for the next person who fell down that particular research rabbit hole to find the relevant content or data that they needed. And this was the start of me considering reuse as part of my own workflow, what I now describe as openness of personal and professional practice. Now, as an example of this sharing, I can remember transcribing a plant specimen label, and I got curious about the collector of that specimen and found their death date. And then I emailed OEGlobal Plants about her. Now, OEGlobal Plants is a database of digitised plant specimens and also information on their collectors. And I sent them the information as well as the supporting evidence, enabling them to add that death date to their database. This information was gratefully received by them. In fact, they were so appreciative, they sent me a bag. These actions also excited the project manager of the Transcription Centre, Megan Ferreter. In fact, she was so excited about my reaching out to other institutions, she wrote a blog post about it, and I was just so flattered. I got such positive reinforcement for this behaviour from both the institution I wrote to as well as the Smithsonian that of course this encouraged me to do more. Now, this tote bag and blog were also concrete examples of how openness of community have helped motivate me. Both the OEGlobal Plants bag and the Smithsonian blog made me feel like a really valued member of this information community. And this feeling was reaffirmed when the Smithsonian invited and funded me to attend and present at a conference alongside crowdsourcing professionals, sharing my perspective as a volunteer for the Transcription Centre. And this generosity, this openness of community, this inviting me in to participate encouraged me not only to continue to transcribe, but also to become much more active in sharing my own experience and knowledge with other communities. It resulted in me submitting an abstract to a New Zealand Museum conference where I shared my perspective on how to encourage volunteers to engage digitally with museum collections through crowdsourcing. Now, another example of this openness of community was when the project manager, Megan, invited me, along with other transcribers, to become co-authors on a scholarly publication. She gave us volunteers the opportunity to share our knowledge about the transcription process and also our motivations for volunteering our time. And this openness of community gave us the opportunity to learn new skills, including how to collaborate on creating a scholarly article. Skills which I'd actually put to good use in future projects. Now, there was one other influential Smithsonian transcription project that had a massive flow-on effect on my volunteering life. I helped transcribe an unassuming catalogue put together in the early 1900s by Joseph Nelson Rose. Now, he was a botanist for the American National Herbarium, and he created this list of plants donated to the herbarium, and he listed what was being sent to him, but more importantly to me, who was actually sending these specimens in. And while transcribing this catalogue, I noticed that many of the names I was transcribing were women who were contributing to science in the early 1900s by collecting and sending in specimens. So many more women than I had ever expected to see. And I got curious about these women and again just could not resist researching them. As an example, here's the marvellous Rose E. Collum. She was a prolific collector of specimens, the first paid botanist of the Grand Canyon National Park, and supported the establishment of the Desert Botanic Garden in Arizona. And if you want to know more about this amazing woman, see her Wikipedia article. Now, we volunteers discussed the discoveries we were making about these women via project notes and on social media, and sometimes even during doing emails to each other. The Smithsonian Archives were really enthusiastic about our research, and they were keen to draw attention to the contributions these women were making to the Smithsonian, and so decided to help organise a Wikipedia editathon. And the aim was to add more content about these women and their contributions to Wikipedia. And so I gave editing Wikipedia a go. That Rosie Column article was one of my first attempts at writing a Wikipedia article. Obviously, it's been massively improved since I first did it. And not only did I learn to edit Wikipedia during these events, it was here I also learned about bias and knowledge gaps in Wikipedia. Attending these events taught me how contributing to Wikipedia can help address these inequalities. Now, I know the Open Education Global community is a fan of this type of work, as my amazing colleague Lucy Moore has recently been awarded the Open Education Global Wildcard Award for 2024. Her entry, Editing Wikipedia as Academic Activism, was rightfully acknowledged by your community as worthy of celebration. She successfully undertook a challenge to write a Wikipedia article about a woman from every country in the world. And not only did she improve Wikipedia and everyone's access to knowledge about these amazing women, she also gained international press coverage, sparked conversations about Wikipedia, knowledge ecosystems, bias, and inspired multiple new and existing editors the world over. Now, this motivation to improve knowledge gaps has also filtered through another project I was involved in. I've been volunteering for the Biodiversity Heritage Library. Now, BHL is a consortium of natural history, botanical, research and national libraries working together to digitise natural history literature in their collections. And BHL makes this literature freely available for open access and also reuse. Now, BHL has the most amazing Flickr feed. Thousands of images of scientific art and illustrations on that platform, and all those images are waiting for metadata to be added to them. And the pictures were just so glorious, and the tagging was so easy, and with that discovery, a new obsession of mine was born. I started by adding taxotags. So these describe the species in the image. And this is where my knowledge of binomials and synonyms honed while transcribing Vernon Bailey field books really came to the fore. And in doing this work, I learned a lot about scientific literature held in BHL, particularly the importance of the first description of species. I had to read through old scientific papers and monographs to try and find the names of the species that had been illustrated in them. And I just absorbed information by pure osmosis. I learned about machine tags. These are the tags that computers can read. And this was my first exposure to triples being used to describe relationships between things and to linked open data in general. The taxo tags we were adding contained machine-readable, structured metadata about the species in the image. Now, the tags we were adding ensured the images were much more easily findable on Flickr, but they had a wider impact. Our tags could accompany the image when that image was downloaded and then reused. So as an example of this, reuse is Wikimedia Commons. Wikicommons is an open image repository for the Wiki movement, and it holds multitudes of openly licensed and public domain images, all freely available for reuse for any purpose. The BHL Flickr feed images had been ingested into Wikimedia Commons, and our tags, those that we had added at that time, actually accompanied those images. So our tags helped those images become much more easily findable as well on Wikicommons. Now, while doing this tagging work, we volunteers, of course, became curious about who was actually doing the illustrations. So we started researching the illustrators and tagging the images with the name of the artist. And while doing this work, we came across more women. I mean, just so many more women. There were so many more women than I had ever expected to find in old scientific literature. I grew up thinking that women didn't start participating in science in large numbers until around the 1950s. The Transcription Centre and the Biodiversity Heritage Library were proving to me that this was just so not the case. Women were everywhere. And it became obvious to us while researching these women that there was a whole host of fabulous female natural history artists who appeared to be seriously under-acknowledged. So we started researching these women, attempting to find out as much as we could about them, and collated our research in a Google spreadsheet. The girls are in green, the boys aren't highlighted. And when we started searching for ways to share our research, to make it more impactful. And this is an example of openness of personal and professional practice. We actively looked for ways to increase the impact of our research to ensure our research could be shared and, importantly, reused. And while looking, we discovered the Stuttgart database of scientific illustrators. And we emailed the editors of this database and requested that women that we were researching be added to this database. And most of the time our research was thorough enough to ensure that we were actually successful in this. We also requested the women be added to the BHL catalogue. And again, we were successful if our research could show that the women illustrators made a significant contribution to a work. BHL would then add them to their catalogue and create a BHL creator identifier for them. And because I'm a Wikipedian, I wanted to get these amazing women into Wikipedia. But one of the main barriers to obtaining a Wikipedia article is Wikipedia's notability criteria. To be notable, the women needed significant coverage and respectable secondary sources. After all, Wikipedia's an encyclopedia, and the information in it has to be verifiable. Verifiability is established via citations of good quality secondary sources. It doesn't matter how amazing these women are, if there are no secondary sources, there can be no article about them. By adding these women illustrators to catalogues and to databases, we were actually helping these women on their journey towards gaining Wikipedia notability. Now, I'm always amazed when people think of Wikipedia as just an online encyclopedia. Yes, it is a really powerful website in its own right. It is one of the most popular websites in the world. But this is not why I love it. I adore it because Wikipedia is openly copyright licensed. Wikipedia can be freely reused by anyone. So internet search engines, such as Google, use Wikipedia to inform their search results. In fact, Google uses Wikipedia in those information pop-ups that often appear on the right-hand side of your search. Wikipedia is used also to inform the answers of virtual assistants, such as Siri and Alexa. Wikipedia is used in content as one of the first stops for large language models, such as ChatGPT. And I wonder whether folk really understand the practical effect of this. I can write a Wikipedia article, yes, referencing books, journals, magazines, newspapers, but it is that article that is one of the top results for an internet search on that topic. To be an editor of Wikipedia is to be in a really powerful position. To write content is one of the first, if not the very first thing people see or hear when searching the internet for a topic is a huge privilege. So being exposed to and writing Wikipedia articles on these natural history scientists and illustrators has also inspired me in other ways. All these folk were studying, collecting and illustrating nature, and they inspired me to think, is there a way that I could engage more deeply with the natural world for the benefit of everyone? Now I found I could use iNaturalist, a citizen science app, as a motivator to get out into nature and to observe species. Now, I'm a fan of iNaturalist because this site allows me to change their default closed copyright license to an open copyright license. So I take photos of species, upload them into the site where they can be shared openly. And the iNaturalist community comes along and attempts to identify my observations and work out down to species grade what I've actually seen. And if I'm lucky, my observation will get confirmed by the community to what's called research grade. And the iNaturalist observation data will then be automatically ingested into the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, or GBIF. GBIF is a huge worldwide aggregator of biodiversity knowledge. It is also where multitudes of scientists access that data for reuse in their research. Now, I was attracted to iNaturalist as not only does it share its data with aggregators, it also makes use of Wikipedia. It ingests Wikipedia articles into its iNaturalist species pages. And these Wikipedia articles can then help volunteers accurately identify the species observed and hopefully get that observation up to research grade. And iNaturalist species pages also have exemplar images of those species. These exemplars are curated by iNaturalist volunteers, ensuring that the best photos representing that species are available to help with identifications. So Wikipedia articles and these exemplar images both help to improve the quality of this observation data that will eventually hopefully get to research grade, that then gets passed on to GBIF, that then gets used by scientists. But it was while contributing to iNaturalist that I became aware of the dire state of New Zealand species articles in Wikipedia and also the need for exemplar photos of New Zealand species. So I set out to help. I started writing Wikipedia articles on New Zealand species, researching, citing publications, often sourced from the Biodiversity Heritage Library. I'd also find openly licensed and expertly identified images of species in order to upload them into Wikimedia Commons. And once in Wikimedia Commons, I can then reuse those images both in the Wikipedia article, but also in iNaturalist as the exemplar image for that species. But where did I go to find these expertly identified, openly reusable images? Well, I went to institutions that openly license their content for reuse. Institutions like the Auckland Museum. Now, I chose the Auckland Museum because they have a policy of open by default, closed by exception for all their content. And this exposure to Auckland Museum and its reuse policy turned out to be yet another learning opportunity for me. When investigating the closed by exception portion of their policy, I gained knowledge that some content that they hold has a cultural status. And I learned that other rights exist outside of copyright that place justified restrictions on reuse. The control for reusing content with a cultural status should be placed in the hands of the relevant iwi or Indigenous community, the source of that content. And I'd actually put that learning into practice in another project of mine, which I'll mention near the end of this presentation. But Auckland Museum didn't have all the images of species that I needed. So I started looking around for openly licensed specimen images held by other organisations. And it was while doing this that I realised some institutions put what I regarded to be as unjustified restrictions on reuse. Take, for example, Te Papa. Now, this time, Te Papa, my national museum, did not use an open licence for their expertly identified specimen images. So I couldn't use the images in Wikicommons, in Wikipedia, in iNaturalist. And I was really frustrated and was desperate to change this. So I wrote to the government minister in charge of Te Papa. I explained what I did. I'm writing Wikipedia articles about New Zealand species. I explain why I was doing it. I want to help obtain data on these species through iNaturalist. I showed how the image licenses used by Te Papa prevented me from reusing their content and was hindering my aims. I also asked, was the financial revenue generated from these specimen images significant enough to justify reuse restrictions? Spoiler alert, no. So this was actually one of my first attempts at advocating for openness, and to my delight, after the intervention of the minister, Te Papa changed their reuse licence on their specimen images to an open Creative Commons attribution licence. Now, this was a huge win for me. Also influenced my thinking about how to go about engaging with institutions on openness. First, it taught me do not bother with middle management. If you want to affect change, go to the top. This success also motivated me to become more active in advocating for openness, because openness has an impact on engagement with content and the reuse of it. As an example, by gaining access to those Te Papa images, I edited more Wikipedia articles and also enriched the iNaturalist site for the benefit of everybody. Now, it was while writing those Wikipedia articles that I learned about the importance of unique identifiers when disseminating knowledge, particularly identifiers like DOIs. A digital object identifier is a unique, permanent, persistent identifier attached to an article or document on the web. Now, if an article has a DOI, it's easier to find and it's easier to cite. And I learned how identifiers can improve access to knowledge as well as the ability to reuse that knowledge. And the importance of unique identifiers was reinforced to me by my expanding understanding of the biodiversity knowledge graph. This graph shows how identifiers exist for the many disparate pieces of biodiversity data and can assist in the digital linking of all that data. And once they're linked, this automatically increases scientific efficiencies because the knowledge is much more easily findable. But more importantly, it also leads to improved knowledge about biodiversity just because the things have been linked. But at the time I was exposed to the biodiversity knowledge graph, I had no idea how I could directly help with this linking. Yes, I could transcribe field journals and specimen labels, putting them into a digital form so that scientists could then use and link the data. Yes, I could ask institutions to put the results of my research into their databases and catalogues, sometimes with only limited success. Yes, I could write Wikipedia articles, cite publications, tag images, upload them into Wikimedia Commons, doing all this to attempt to make all these elements more easily findable and reusable, but I'd yet to come across a way that I could help directly with the digital linking of all these elements. Now, I feel like there should be a massive beam of light and an extremely powerful major chord of music at this stage, echoing around this entire auditorium to indicate exactly how important this moment was for me, because I discovered Wikidata. Now, Wikidata is a sister project to Wikipedia. It is a free, open knowledge base that can be read and edited by both humans and computers. It's a structured database of knowledge that can be queried, so anyone can access that knowledge. And it's also a database hub, so it links to other databases. Think of Wikidata as a linked, open, structured database that contains data on pretty much everything, and then links to more detailed data held in other repositories. And because of Wikidata's generalist nature, I am of the opinion that it is the linking tool that I could use for my contributions to the biodiversity knowledge graph. The one ring to rule them all. As a New Zealander, that's obligatory. Although hopefully for good and not evil. Finally, I had found a place that I could put all my research, all the connections I was finding for my specimen collectors, for my women scientific illustrators, for my New Zealand species, for the journal articles and their authors, for anything and everything that I was working on. I no longer had to rely on requesting third-party institutions to edit their databases or catalogues to get my discoveries linked in, findable, reusable. I could add, create, curate data myself in this fabulously huge, growing exponentially web of open and reusable information. I could cite references supporting the inclusion and linking of this data. And because Wikidata is openly licensed for reuse under a Creative Commons zero license, anyone can then reuse that data for anything. And so for our women scientific illustrators, I could create Wikidata items for all of them, adding as much of our research into their items as I could. And because Wikidata is multidisciplinary, I could add information not just about them being illustrators. I could add their identifiers, such as the Stuttgart Scientific Illustrator ID and the BHL Creator ID, as well as information on their employers, the books and articles that they had contributed to, the specimens they may very well have collected in order to make their illustrations, the field notes they may have written while doing that work, their membership of clubs and societies, links to places they lived, people they were related to. I could represent them not just as illustrators, but as multifaceted people. And by adding all our research data to this linked, open repository, I could make these women as visible as possible. And I hope to increase the likelihood that researchers would find and use that data, add to it, generating secondary sources that I and others like me would then in turn use to write a Wikipedia article that would then ensure that an internet search on these women would return a rich result, ensuring recognition and encouraging more research on these women and their contributions. And because I could see the massive potential of Wikidata across all my projects, my work on Wikidata began to dominate everything. I started doing less transcribing, less tagging, even less Wikipedia article writing, and instead would add to or curate Wikidata. And one of the areas I focused in on was working on the Biodiversity Heritage Library catalogue, linking their creator identifiers to the appropriate Wikidata people items. And I was thrilled when BHL began making use of this work to help merge duplicate identifiers in their own catalogue for particular creators. Now, BHL went a step further and used Wikidata to actually improve their catalogue records. BHL ingested a variety of other identifiers into their catalogue, identifiers that were sourced from Wikidata items, important identifiers like VIAF, the Virtual International Authority File, or the Library of Congress Authority File Identifier. And BHL was only able to do this because of the open licensing of Wikidata and the work done by me and multitudes of other editors, linking the BHL Creator Identifier to the appropriate Wikidata item that then contained further links to these other identifiers. This reuse of Wikidata by BHL also inspired me. I started actively seeking out tools that reused Wikidata to help expand the biodiversity knowledge graph. Tools like Binomia. Now, Binomia is a website that helps digitally link people who collected natural history specimens to the specimens they actually collected. And the Wikidata item for the collector is used by Binomia to facilitate this type of linking. And because of my interest in filling knowledge gaps and fighting bias, I proactively used Binomia and Wikidata to highlight the contributions of natural history collectors from marginalised groups. Marginalised groups such as women, Indigenous people, or people from underrepresented locations such as the Global South. And as a result of my work with Binomia, I was actually invited to contribute to a project to help create a dataset about specimens of bats. So what's so special about bats, you ask? Well, this was at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, and they were a known host of COVID and other SARS-type viruses. And this particular project was aimed at helping scientists understand the sources, distribution and spread of COVID by providing a comprehensive data set of bat specimens, the hosts of those viruses. Now, I contributed to this project by teaching scientists how to create Wikidata items for the collectors of those specimens, and then how to use those Wikidata items in Binomia to link to the collectors of their specimens. Because if you know who the collector of a particular specimen is, this can confirm things like collection dates, locations, provide links to field journals, co-collectors, expeditions. All of this data can help give richer context about the collection of those specimens and assist with further research on the behaviour of those bats and the viruses they're carrying. Now, my undertaking of this work would have been impossible had it not been for the openness of content, both Wikidata and the associated bat specimen data. It would have been impossible without the openness of community, the organisers inviting me, a volunteer, in to help participate. The impact of this work was increased as a result of the project's openness of personal and professional practice. The dataset was openly licensed, so it could be reused by anyone, and it's been placed on and linked to in multiple data repositories, widening its impact. Now, as well as working on specimen collectors in Wikidata and Binomia, I've also been collaborating with an international group of scientists to create identifiers for research expeditions. And we're using Wikidata to collate descriptive data about those research expeditions and are creating an identifier, the Wikidata item QID as it's called, for those expeditions. We aim to openly share this data for the benefit of everyone. Now, this work led me to being a Wikimedian in residence at Te Papa, adding research expedition data to Wikidata. Now, up to now, I've been emphasising openness and sharing of data. But it was during this project that my growing awareness of Indigenous rights of data sovereignty and the principle of Mātauranga, which recognises the authority of the creator and owner over their taonga, which is treasure, it's a very inaccurate definition, really came to the fore. Because I came across an expedition that had deeply integrated Indigenous knowledge. It was an expedition led by Tūtaka Ngātau, a Tūhoi chief and tūhonga, or expert. He passed his knowledge about the traditional medicinal uses of plants collected during that expedition onto a botanist, Elston Best. And Best wrote this knowledge on the botanical specimen labels and also discussed it in a book he wrote. Now, although this knowledge had been publicly available for well over 120 years, I was well aware that collating, connecting and sharing this data in Wikidata would make it exponentially more accessible and reusable. And as a source and custodians of this knowledge, Tūhoi have data sovereignty rights regarding access and reuse of it. So I did not add this expedition to Wikidata and instead sought the guidance of Te Papa's Mātauranga Māori team. Now, this team determined that in cases like these, we need to work this through with the relevant Indigenous community, following Te Papa's principle of Mātauranga, as well as the care principles of Indigenous data governance and the Māori data governance model. So this expedition will not be placed in Wikidata by me without the permission of Tūhoi. Now, I'm nearing the end of my presentation. I just want to discuss one more example of openness that's particularly relevant to the Open Education Global movement and the attendees at this conference. So I've been invited to collaborate on creating open education content. Yet another opportunity resulting from my colleagues practicing openness of community. I'm helping to create a CURE, a course-based undergraduate research experience, sharing the workflow where Wikidata and Binomia are used to connect collectors to their specimens. And our group want to teach undergraduate students methods to help marginalised groups gain recognition for their contributions to biodiversity knowledge. We aim to teach skills to help eliminate at least some of the historical bias in natural history collections and to try and give richer historical context to the creation of those collections. And at the very start of this project, our group agreed to share the CURE modules under a Creative Commons attribution licence on the publisher's website. That's an open licence. We exercised openness of personal and professional practice because we also actively shared several of the modules and the resources we created for those modules prior to their official publication. We treated these modules like they were academic articles and shared a preprint version on various platforms. And we did this to expose the modules and their resources to a much wider audience. Now, openly licensing and pushing out to other platforms ensured that these resources could be reused, including in yet another project I was involved in. So a group of us wiki editors ran a Wikidata workshop at the International Botanical Congress in Madrid. And we used the resources created for that cure to help teach established professional botanists how to edit Wikidata and then how to use those Wikidata items in Binomia to attribute specimens to their collectors. And because the cure documents were openly licensed under a Creative Commons attribution license and open license, we could translate them into Spanish, opening up the training to communities in Spain where the conference was being held, and also the Spanish-speaking Global South. And we added these translations of the secure documents to Zenodo, a research repository that generates a DOI for the documents. And the DOI facilitated the sharing of these documents, for example, and this is just one example, in the ORCID research profiles of the authors of those documents, creating yet another avenue for access. We then also added the cure documents and their translations to Wikimedia Commons and created Wikidata items for these publications, so everything was all beautifully linked. By openly licensing our content and then actively adding them to multiple platforms, this exposed numerous communities to these training resources and empowered these communities to take advantage of them, both to improve their skills or just to reuse them for their own purposes. So in conclusion, I hope in my presentation I've inspired you to think more broadly about openness. Openness of content that you yourself generate in your own personal and professional lives. Openness of community, where you and your institutions can show generosity and who you actively invite, support and include in your activities and efforts. I hope I've inspired you to consider your own openness of personal and professional practice. I hope you share and reuse your knowledge and the resources you generate widely on multiple platforms to reach as wide an audience as possible with the greatest ability to reuse that content. I encourage you to actively advocate for openness in your community and at your institution and walk the talk of openness in your own lives, if appropriate and where possible. Because if everyone does this, open really will become everybody's business.
I'm sorry, but let's just keep clapping. Thank you. Siobhan, thank you once again. Now you know, right, in 2019 when we saw Siobhan, she filled my passion cup, everyone's passion cup, and I think everyone here is so enthusiastic to go skip morning tea, go down to that Wikimedia workshop. So you better get a seat because there's only a few seats down in M2 at 10:30 with Kerry and Alice and Isla as well. But Siobhan, thank you so much. Well, does anyone have any questions for Siobhan? We've got time. Oh, yeah, we go.
Sorry, what's that? When did I start? Oh, God. Okay, it'd be over 10 years ago now. Yeah, 10 years ago. But it's like everything. Everyone's on a learning journey. So I started out knowing nothing and just dabbling, and then got knowledge and more knowledge and learned, and it's curiosity. And then I'm the type of person who'll ask questions as well, so I engaged with community and also had at this time Twitter was actually good, and I had a very active Twitter feed. In fact, if you go look at it now, you'll see thousands and thousands and thousands of posts I've done. But that's because I ended up engaging with this whole range of people, and the people I'm engaging with were GLAM people, galleries, libraries, archives and museums. So they were proactive about inviting me in and were just so enthusiastic that someone cared and was curious about what they were doing that they were very supportive, very, very supportive. So I've just been very lucky with the communities I've been engaging with and have the ability to actually do this work. Yeah.
Why people are having a think. Siobhan, what is one step forward that someone in this room has listened to you, their passion cup is full, no, I want to start. Where would you say?
Please openly license your content. Okay, and I mean open. I want people to investigate what Creative Commons licenses are and realise that there are only 3 that are open and the rest are closed. Anyone who puts non-commercial use, that is a closed licence and restricts, because no one knows what commercial use is, and there is no definition as far as I'm aware. I've got no idea what a commercial is. Is it making tea towels? Is it at a I don't know, taking something and making a tea towel at a kindy? Is that a commercial use? I don't know. So I would like to ban everybody using non-commercial. I recognise that sometimes you have a journey to go through, or your institution has a journey to go through, but seriously, you get more impact and more reputation and kudos for openly licensing and sharing it with multiple communities than you ever will if you just put a more restrictive licence on it. So just see what you can do with your own content, and I'm talking about personal content as well as professional content, and see how much you can get away with. Don't ask for permission, for God's sake. Don't. Just do it, and then see if someone moans. Make it a default. Yeah.
Well, Siobhan, sorry, I'm jumping over here. Siobhan, everyone has an opportunity on tomorrow. It's Friday tomorrow to think about some questions for you, because Siobhan is going to be joining Robert and Penny on our panel in the afternoon. So please think about some questions, and also can chat with you over morning tea if they aren't running downstairs to the Wikimedia workshop, which you may or may not be at, right?
I'll definitely be there, but right. I can have a cup of coffee, I think.
Great. Everybody, thank you for coming on this morning, listening to Siobhan. Thank you, Siobhan, so much. Let's give Siobhan another round of applause.
Just one very quick consideration is that during morning tea, the convention staff will be putting up the walls so that we have the 3 rooms. Unfortunately, they cannot begin work until everyone is out. They're not allowed to have any people in the room. So if you could please help them by